Man, let me make this clear from the start. School was never about making you powerful. It was never about making you rich. It was never about giving you the tools to dominate life. School was about obedience. From the second you walked into that classroom, you were not being educated. You were being programmed. Think about the first commands drilled into you. Sit down. Stay quiet. Raise your hand to speak. That's not education, that's training. They wanted you to learn the habit of asking permission for everything. That bell that rang every hour wasn't freedom. It was conditioning. Ring the bell, move. Ring the bell, stop. That's how you train dogs, not how you create leaders. But you didn't notice because they dressed it up in books and blackboards. The entire environment was built to break you into a system of compliance. That's why school felt boring. That's why it felt useless. Because it was never for you. It was for them. Now let's talk about the content, man. Look at what they fed you. History written by the winners. Stripped of rebellion. Stripped of truth. Sanitized stories about wars, kings, governments. All presented as if obedience was the path forward. Did they ever teach you how empires were built by men who broke the rules? Did they ever explain that revolutions came from men who said, fuck this system? Of course not. They told you Columbus discovered America like nobody was already there. They gave you dates and names, but never strategy, never lessons in power. They don't want you learning how to think. They want you memorizing their script. And math? Same scam? Just enough to pay your bills, to calculate your taxes, to follow their rules, but not enough to understand wealth. Not enough to understand leverage. They left you blind to the game that actually matters: money, power, and freedom. Man, think about grades. They told you good grades mean you're smart. Bullshit. Good grades mean you're obedient. Good grades mean you memorized their answers and regurgitated them like a parrot. Intelligence isn't repeating what someone else said. Intelligence is asking why, questioning authority, solving problems with creativity. And what happened if you did that in school? You got punished. You got told you're disruptive. I know because I lived it. I used to sit in class asking, why are we learning this? How will this help me get rich? How will this make me strong? And teachers hated it. They didn't have answers. They wanted silence. They wanted obedience. They didn't want me thinking for myself. That's when I realized school doesn't reward thinkers. It rewards drums. The kids who kept quiet, who copied everything, who followed instructions like sheep. They got gold stars. They got told they'd go far. And most of them ended up as slaves in 9-to-5s, proud of their little paper degree that meant nothing in the real world. And let's be honest, look at the teachers. These were the so-called experts preparing you for life. Were they rich? Were they powerful? Were they living lives worth copying? No, they were broke. They were tired. They were stuck in the very system they preached was your path to success. How can someone earning scraps teach you how to win? It's like taking fitness advice from someone obese. It makes no sense. I knew even then. If I wanted to learn how to win at life, I needed to learn from winners. Men with money. Men with freedom. Men who had built their empires outside of this mental prison. But school doesn't bring those men in. It hides them. It silences them. Because if kids saw the truth early, if kids saw what real power looked like, the entire education system would collapse. And that's the point, man. School wasn't about teaching you skills that mattered. It was about hiding them. Did they teach you how to sell? No. Did they teach you how to negotiate? No. Did they teach you how to build discipline, how to fight stress, how to stay strong when life crushed you? No, they taught you algebra you'll never use. They taught you geography you'll forget. They made you memorize poems and equations that mean nothing when you're out in the real world fighting for freedom. But notice the subjects they ignored. Money, taxes, investing, power, leverage, the exact skills that could free you from the system. They hid those because if you had them, you wouldn't need their 9-to-5. You wouldn't need their banks. You wouldn't need their chains. You'd walk out of the casino and never come back. And that's the last thing they want. Man, I'll tell you this from experience. When I was young, I sat in those classes knowing it was all bullshit. The teacher would lecture about some war, some piece of literature, some algebra formula, and I'd sit there thinking, how does this make me rich? How does this make me strong? And the answer was always the same. It doesn't. But ask that out loud and suddenly you're the problem. Suddenly you're disruptive. Suddenly you're the bad kid. Why? Because the system hates men who question. The system hates men who demand results. They want compliance, not challenge. They want silence, not strength. And that's why they punish the very instinct that could make you powerful. School isn't just boring. It's a prison designed to kill the warrior in you before you even know you have one. And here's the saddest part. Most men leave school proud of their chains. They take their diploma, their degree, their little piece of paper and wave it around like it's freedom. It's not freedom. It's a receipt. Proof that you've been domesticated. Proof that you followed instructions. Proof that you bent the knee to their system and survived the training camp. And now you're ready for the real world. But the real world isn't about grades. The real world doesn't care about your degree. The real world cares about results. And most men, fresh out of this mental prison, don't have any results. They have compliance. They have obedience. And that's exactly what the system wanted from the start. The truth is, man, school is not a place of learning. It's a factory where they take wild, curious, rebellious kids and mold them into quiet, obedient, predictable adults. They grind down your edges, strip away your courage, and replace it with fear of authority. They condition you to raise your hand, to wait your turn, to follow the rules, and then they pat themselves on the back for preparing you for life. No, they prepared you for slavery. They prepared you to sit at the 9-to-5 table, pulling levers until you die. They trained you not to think, not to fight, not to build, but to obey. And the longer you stayed inside that system, the deeper the prison walls grew around your mind. Man, the biggest scam about school is the dream they dangle in front of you. Study hard, get the grades, get into university, grab the degree, and suddenly the world will open its doors. That's the fairy tale. But look around at the people who believed it. Most of them are broke, tired, and living paycheck to paycheck, still trapped in the very system they were promised would free them. I remember sitting in class and watching kids panic about tests, stressing like the answers were life or death. And I used to think, do you really believe this bullshit will make you rich? Do you really think this little paper means you'll escape the grind? But nobody wanted to hear it. They were too busy chasing approval. They thought an A on paper would turn into millions in their bank account. And it never did. When I was a kid, I had teachers who hated me because I refused to play their game. I wasn't some perfect little student. I questioned everything. They'd say, you have to learn this, and I'd ask why. How does this make me money? How does this make me strong? They never had an answer. They'd get red in the face, tell me I was disruptive, try to make me feel like I was the problem. But I wasn't the problem. They were. They were broke, miserable, living examples that the path they preached was worthless. How can a teacher earning scraps show me how to live big? How can someone who never left the prison show me the way out? That's like a prisoner teaching escape plans. The truth is, they weren't trying to teach me to win. They were trying to condition me to stay in line, just like them. And look at the subjects they obsessed over. Endless equations, endless memorization, endless essays. When has any of that ever made a man free? I've been around millionaires, billionaires, fighters, hustlers, businessmen. And I'll tell you something right now. Not one of them became who they are because they remembered the date of some battle or solved for X in algebra. They became who they are because they understood people, because they knew how to sell, because they learned discipline, because they refused to quit when life smashed them in the face. School never taught that. School taught fear of failure. School taught obedience. School taught men to fold under pressure, not to rise above it. And the men who swallowed that poison spent the rest of their lives taking orders and hoping for a promotion. I'll tell you a story, man. Back when I was younger, I remember getting into trouble for not sitting still. Teachers thought I had too much energy. Too much energy? That's called life. That's called ambition. That's called drive. They wanted to medicate me, to calm me down, to make me another obedient zombie. Imagine that. A system so broken it sees raw ambition as a disease. That's what school does. It doesn't want lions. It wants sheep. And when it sees a lion, it tries to cut off his claws. That's why most men grow up never realizing the fire inside them was beaten out before they even had a chance to use it. The system trims the edges, sands you down, makes you small. By the time you graduate, you're not a man ready to conquer the world. You're a man trained to accept a chair in the casino and pull the lever like everyone else. The way they grade you is another joke. A little letter on a piece of paper decides your value. Think about how absurd that is. They take infinite human potential and reduce it to a fucking alphabet. You're an A, you're a B, you're a C, as if that defines your worth. I've seen students who ended up broke and depressed. I've seen dropouts who built empires. Because the real world doesn't care about grades. The real world cares about results. But school can't measure results because results don't come from obedience. They come from action, from risk, from creativity, from chaos. School doesn't like chaos. It doesn't like outliers. It doesn't like rule breakers. So it convinces men that grades equal success. And men waste their lives chasing grades instead of building results. That's why the system wins. Because you waste your fire competing for their approval instead of building your empire. Man, think about how much time you wasted in that system. Years of your life sitting in chairs, staring at blackboards, memorizing garbage. Time you could have spent building. Time you could have spent hustling. Time you could have spent learning real skills that matter. Instead, you were stuck in classrooms learning things you'll never use. And the reason is obvious. They don't want men who build. They don't want men who hustle. They don't want men who dominate. They want men who comply. The longer you sit in that prison, the more your mind accepts the chains as normal. And by the time you finally graduate, you don't even realize you're in a cell. That's how deep the programming goes. And here's the trick, man. The obedient ones, the ones who played the game perfectly, they ended up the most trapped. They followed every rule, did every assignment, memorized every line. And when they walked out, they thought the world owed them. They thought that little degree meant doors would open. And then reality smacked them in the face. They realized the degree wasn't a key. It was a leash. They were still broke. They were still working for scraps. They were still living paycheck to paycheck. But now they had debt on their back and no idea how to get out. That's the cruelest joke of all. The very men who trusted the system most ended up chained to it the tightest. That's not success. That's betrayal. But the house doesn't care because it's been running this scam for generations. Man, I knew early that I couldn't take school seriously because the entire setup was a clown show. Imagine sitting in a room being lectured on success by someone who had none. Imagine being taught how to think by someone who never questioned a thing in their life. It's pathetic, but most men never see it because the prison walls aren't made of bricks. They're made of lies. And those lies sink deep into your mind until you can't even tell where the prison ends and where you begin. That's why it's called a mental prison. Because even after you walk out of the building, the walls stay with you. Man, here's the raw truth nobody wants to admit. School wasn't just boring, it was a fucking setup. A dress rehearsal for the 9 to 5. The entire process was designed to make you comfortable with slavery. Think about it. You wake up early, drag yourself to a place you don't want to be, sit in a chair for hours, obey someone barking instructions, and then go home too tired to do anything else. That's not education. That's job training. They conditioned you to accept monotony, to accept authority, to accept wasting your life. They disguised it as learning, but it was grooming. And by the time you were done, you were so used to that cycle that stepping straight into a 9 to 5 felt normal. That wasn't an accident. That was the plan. I'll tell you what's fucked. The kids who hated school the most, the ones who got in trouble, the ones who couldn't sit still, those kids were the lions. They had energy, fire, rebellion, but the system crushed it out of them. It drugged them. It labeled them. It made them feel broken for not fitting in. And the kids who obeyed, who sat quietly, who memorized everything without question, they were told they'd go far. And they did. Straight into cubicles, straight into debt, straight into slavery. That's the genius of the system. They rewarded obedience and punished rebellion until you forgot how to fight. By the time you graduate, you don't even see the chains because you've been wearing them so long they feel like skin. Man, when I was younger, I knew deep down this shit was rigged. I'd watch the teachers talk about being on time, following instructions, respecting authority. And I'd think, why the fuck should I respect authority if the authority is broke? That's the biggest joke of all. The very people telling you how to succeed were living proof the system failed. They weren't rich. They weren't free. They weren't powerful. They were tired, broke, and trapped, but still preaching obedience. It's like getting driving lessons from someone who never left their driveway. And yet millions of kids sat there, nodding along, never questioning why they were taking advice from losers. That's how deep the mental prison runs. It makes you ignore your own logic. And what was the end goal? That degree, that piece of paper. The holy grail of the education system. Parents brag about it. Students sacrifice years chasing it. And for what? So you can send out a resume like every other desperate sheep, begging a company to chain you to a desk. That's what school trained you for. To be another cog. To accept the grind. To clap when your boss gives you a little raise. To smile when they hand you a plastic award for Employee of the Month. It's all bullshit. The system teaches you to love crumbs and call it a meal. They never wanted you free. They wanted you just smart enough to follow instructions and just dumb enough to never break free. Man, I've met people who wasted decades on that path. They played the game perfectly. Straight A's, university degree, 9 to 5. And now they're miserable, drowning in debt, waking up every morning to do shit they hate. And the sickest part, they still believe they did the right thing. They still believe the system will reward them if they just keep pulling the lever. That's the tragedy. They can't admit they were scammed, so they double down. They work harder, obey more, pray for promotions that don't mean shit. Meanwhile, the house laughs because, once again, the obedient ones are the easiest to fleece. I'll give you a story, man. Back in school, I'd watch the so-called good students. They'd panic if they got a B instead of an A. They'd cry over test scores, obsess about homework, stay up all night trying to impress teachers. And those kids ended up the most enslaved. They became the accountants, the office workers, the ones stuck in traffic every day, living for weekends. And the rebels? The dropouts? The ones everyone called troublemakers? Some of them went on to build businesses, fight in rings, create lives outside the system because they refused to swallow the bullshit. The ones who couldn't sit still weren't broken. They were lions trapped in cages. And the cages broke too many of them before they ever got to roar. School is a fucking grooming camp. Don't dress it up. Don't romanticize it. It was never about math or literature. It was about teaching you to sit down, shut up, and obey authority without question. It was about killing rebellion early. It was about making sure by the time you hit 18, you were perfectly molded to walk into a cubicle without asking why. And you want to know the worst part? Most people defend it. They'll tell you education is necessary. They'll tell you school made them who they are. Yeah, it made you who you are. A compliant, obedient worker who thinks success means paying off debt and retiring broke. Congratulations. The system worked perfectly on you. Man, you've got to see this for what it is. School didn't prepare you for life. It prepared you for slavery. And unless you break out of that programming, you'll stay in chains, clapping for scraps, proud of the little paper that proves you followed all the rules. That's not education. That's indoctrination. That's why school is a mental prison. And every man who doesn't wake up to this fact will spend his life pulling the lever in someone else's casino, never realizing the game was rigged from the start. Man, here's what you need to understand. Leaving school doesn't mean you left the prison. The walls don't disappear when you graduate. They stay inside your head. The habits, the obedience, the fear of authority, all of it follows you into adulthood. That's why so many men step straight from the classroom into the cubicle like it's the most natural thing in the world. They don't even see the bars anymore. That's the genius of the system. By the time you're grown, the chains are invisible. And you defend them. You'll fight for them. You'll tell your own kids that school is the way, that a degree will save them. That's how deep the brainwashing goes. It's generational slavery disguised as opportunity. And men keep passing it on because they're too scared to admit they got played. The media makes sure the mental prison stays locked tight. School handed you over to the dealer, and now the dealer controls your thoughts. Every screen, every headline, every advertisement is carefully designed to keep you distracted. They shove fear down your throat one day, false hope the next, and bullshit entertainment every hour in between. You think you're choosing what you watch, but fuck no. You're being fed exactly what they want you to consume. The education system trained you to sit quietly and accept information without question, and the media exploits that programming for life. That's why you believe their lies. That's why you argue about nonsense. You've been trained to obey screens the same way you obey teachers. Different classroom, same control. Man, I'll tell you a story from my own life. When I was younger, I started noticing how fake the media was. They'd report on successful people, but when I looked closely, those people weren't free. They were dancing monkeys for corporations, for governments, for the same machine that enslaves everyone else. And I remember thinking, if school lied to me and media is lying to me, then who the fuck is telling the truth? That's when I realized the answer: nobody. The truth doesn't get handed to you. The truth is something you hunt. And most men never hunt it because they're too distracted by football games, celebrity scandals, and political bullshit. Bread and circuses, man. The same shit they used in ancient Rome. Nothing has changed. They just upgraded the packaging. And let's not pretend the culture around you is any better. Culture is just another extension of the mental prison. They make you believe life is about chasing comfort, chasing entertainment, chasing approval. They glorify mediocrity. They hand out trophies for participation. They tell you to be safe, to be nice, to be humble. All words that mean the same thing. Be weak. The education system trained you to accept rules, and the culture reinforces those rules. That's why you've got grown men wasting their lives playing video games, getting drunk every weekend, jerking off to porn, numbing themselves with fast food and bullshit. It's all conditioning. It's all designed to keep you docile. Because a weak man is no threat to the system. A weak man is easy to tax, easy to distract, easy to enslave. Man, think about relationships. Even those are poisoned by the same programming. You were taught to chase romance like it's salvation. Find someone, settle down, get married, buy a house, have kids, follow the script. And most men do it because they think it's freedom. But what happens when it all falls apart? Divorce courts, alimony, child support. The system gets a cut. Once again, you're the product. Your personal life turned into profit. And while you're busy arguing, fighting, and suffering, the house keeps cashing in. That's the reality. School trained you to follow scripts. Media fed you illusions. And culture wrapped the chains in shiny packaging so you'd never notice. The mental prison doesn't end at graduation. It just changes shape. The saddest thing is watching men who actually believe they're free. They buy a car. They buy a house. They get a little promotion. And they think they've won. They brag about scraps like dogs with bones. They don't even realize the house let them win small just to keep them hooked. That's the system's genius. Give you a little taste of success, enough to keep you loyal, but never enough to let you walk away. Taxes, debt, bills, inflation, they'll always find a way to drag you back. And because school taught you to respect authority, to trust the system, you never fight. You just nod your head and call it normal. But it's not normal, man. It's slavery. Neon slavery with background music and Netflix subscriptions. Man, I knew early that if I wanted out, I had to reprogram my own brain. I had to unlearn everything school drilled into me. I had to stop asking permission. I had to stop waiting for approval. I had to stop giving a shit about fitting into their mold. And that's when life started to change. That's when I started building my own table instead of sitting at theirs. Because here's the truth. The system doesn't collapse because you complain. It collapses when men stop playing. And most men will never stop playing because they're addicted to the comfort, the lies, the hope. They're addicted to the very chains that enslave them. That's why the house always wins. Because most men would rather stay in the mental prison they know than step into the unknown. Man, let's not sugarcoat this. The education system is the foundation of your slavery. Everything else, the 9 to 5, the media, the debt, the culture. It all starts with school. That's where they break you in. That's where they teach you to doubt yourself and worship authority. That's where they strip out rebellion and reward obedience. And once that programming is in your head, they don't even need to lock you in a physical prison. You carry the prison with you. That's why most men live their entire lives inside invisible chains. They can't even imagine life outside the system because they've been taught since childhood that the system is life. That's the real scam. They don't just steal your time. They steal your imagination. They convince you there is no alternative. Man, I've met thousands of men in my life. Fighters, hustlers, businessmen, soldiers. And I'll tell you the difference between the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. The ones who made it broke out of the mental prison. They stopped giving a fuck about grades. They stopped begging for approval. They stopped waiting for permission to act. The ones who failed, they kept the prison alive in their heads. They thought playing by the rules would save them. They thought being polite, obedient, and quiet would one day get rewarded. But the system doesn't reward obedience with freedom. It rewards obedience with more chains. That's why the broke, tired, compliant worker is celebrated. He's called responsible. He's called successful. But behind closed doors, he's miserable. And the system loves it because miserable men keep pulling the lever. I'll tell you another story from my own life. I remember when teachers used to tell me I'd never make it if I didn't stop being disruptive. Imagine that. These broke fucks, trapped in a job they hated, had the audacity to tell me about success. I knew deep down they weren't shit. I knew I had more fire in me than they could ever understand. And I was right. Because years later, when I was making money, traveling the world, fighting in rings, building businesses, I realized every single word they said was a projection of their own failure. They weren't more to me about my future. They were confessing about theirs. They knew they'd already lost, and they couldn't stand to see someone like me break free. That's the truth. Teachers don't prepare you for success. They prepare you for their misery. And they get angry when you refuse to join them. Man, the system doesn't just fail you. It mocks you. It makes you believe you're free while keeping you chained. They hand you a diploma like it's a sword, but it's really a fucking leash. You brag about your degree, you brag about your grades, you brag about following the rules. But what does it get you? Debt, a job you hate, a life you never wanted. They make you proud of your slavery. That's the sickest part. You celebrate the very chains that keep you small. You smile for the photos, you toss your graduation cap in the air, and you clap for yourself like a trained SEAL. And all the while, the system laughs because it knows you're too far gone to fight back. That's the ultimate con. They don't need to hide the chains because you're proud to wear them. Man, I've seen how this shit plays out. I've seen men who never broke out of the mental prison. They grow old, bitter, resentful, still bragging about the little scraps they were given. They tell younger men to be realistic, to play it safe, to follow the rules. And those younger men repeat the cycle, passing the prison from one generation to the next. But every now and then, a man wakes up. He sees the bars. He feels the chains. And instead of accepting them, he rips them off. That man is dangerous. That man terrifies the system. Because once one man escapes, he shows others it's possible. And the whole illusion starts to crack. That's why they fight so hard to keep you obedient. Because if too many men woke up, the house would fall. And they know it. Man, here's the truth most won't accept. The education system was never broken. It's working exactly as designed. It was never meant to create free thinkers. It was meant to create workers. It was never meant to produce leaders. It was meant to produce followers. It was never meant to help you win. It was meant to make sure the house always wins. And it's been doing that job flawlessly for generations. You are not the player in this game. You are the chip. And unless you take control of your mind, you will stay a chip until the day you die. That's why this message matters. That's why this truth burns. Because it forces you to face the reality you've been avoiding your whole life. You were lied to from day one. The final decision, man, is simple. You can keep defending the prison. You can keep pretending your degree means something. You can keep telling yourself the system will reward you if you just stay patient. Or you can wake the fuck up. You can admit you were lied to. You can admit you wasted years in a classroom built to chain you. And then you can start building something real. But that choice takes courage. It takes clarity. It takes the kind of discipline most men will never have. And that's why most men stay slaves. They don't lack opportunity. They lack balls. They'd rather cling to the comfort of their chains than step into the fire of freedom. That's why the house always wins. That's why the system keeps laughing. Because most men don't have the guts to walk away. Man, school is not education. School is indoctrination. School is not freedom. School is a mental prison. And until you rip the bars out of your own head, you will stay trapped, clapping for scraps, smiling for approval, and wasting the only life you've got. Don't tell me about grades. Don't tell me about degrees. Don't tell me about diplomas. Show me results. Show me freedom. Show me power. Because if you don't have those, you're still in chains, no matter how smart you think you are. And the system doesn't care. The house will always take your chips. The question is, are you going to keep playing their game, or are you ready to flip the fucking table and finally live on your own terms? Because that's the only way to win in a world designed for you to lose. That's the only way out of the prison. That's the only way forward. That's the only way you'll ever breathe, fight, and fucking live. So